On today's show, the Rockets trade Cam Whitmore to the Wizards for a pair of second-round picks. Why it didn't work out with Cam, and will Houston regret this trade down the line? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Bit of a bummer of an episode today, as the Rockets reportedly trading Cam Whitmore to the Washington Wizards for a pair of future 2 second-round picks in the future. Yeah, this sucks. Like, there's no way around it, and it's just a really unfortunate end to what we can't even say, like, because Cam really didn't get a chance to really showcase himself with the Rockets. And he is an unfortunate casualty of the accelerated pace of the Rockets rebuild. And look, here's the thing. I've got a bunch of thoughts that I want to share on this, and this might be we might jump around a little bit this episode. I usually try to have things, neatly formatted, 3 segments, I don't know. I'm going to try and get all my thoughts out on this, but it might not be super clean. So we'll see how it goes. I do want to talk a little bit, about, will the Rockets regret this trade? We'll talk about, was there better value out there than what they got back for Cam Whitmore? Why it ultimately didn't work out with Cam Whitmore? What are some of the reasons that led to this decision? I'm going to try and unpack all of that. Let me just start with the reporting from Shams. So Houston Rockets are trading Cam Whitmore to the Washington Wizards for 2 second-round picks. I can't even talk. Wow. And then those picks are reportedly one, a 2026 Bulls second-round pick, and then a 2029 Kings second-round pick. So at least the second-round picks are of like decent value. Because those should be decent enough second-round, but like where those will be, hopefully like, mid 40s, high 40s, or I guess low 40s, I should say, from the state of both the Bulls and Kings organizations. So let me start off by saying this is disappointing because obviously Cam has a ton of talent, and it's unfortunate because there were various points in his first 2 seasons with the Rockets where it felt like, given the flashes of talent that we saw, that he should have been afforded a bigger opportunity within the rotation. And unfortunately, that opportunity never really came to pass. And it certainly feels like this whole situation, it's not all Cam's fault. It's also not all the Rockets' fault. But there's blame on both sides. Absolutely. I think there's a level of maybe some inflexibility that Ime Udoka had with Cam. Now, granted, we don't know the whole story. We don't know all the behind the scenes. We don't know what was going on at practices, at shoot-arounds, just we don't know what Cam's work ethic was like behind the scenes. But from what we did see and from the reporting that we have heard, right, there was kind of a disconnect at times between Cam and Ime as far as expectations, as far as buy-in, as far as what Ime wanted out of Cam in the role that he could have had on this team. And when you go and look at the reporting surrounding this trade, essentially the Rockets worked with Cam Whitmore to send him to his preferred destination. There's reporting from Shams, additional reporting from Shams, that says that the Rockets had multiple offers on the table for Cam Whitmore, but wanted to see him go somewhere that gave him a legitimate chance to thrive in his career. And so the Rockets may have had a better offer. They might have had like a late first on the table for Cam Whitmore. And in fact, there was additional reporting elsewhere that said that Cam Whitmore was originally a part of the package to go to the Phoenix Suns, but the Suns preferred getting the 5 second-round picks. So that kind of tells you how other teams are evaluating Cam Whitmore at this point. The fact that the Suns chose 5 second-round picks over Cam Whitmore, and getting those second-round picks ultimately turned into getting Rasheer Fleming for Phoenix. So I think maybe they view things as working out pretty well in that regard. So it very much feels and looks like, right, there was some mismanagement by the Rockets in their behalf, I think, and in particular from Ime Udoka, in the inability to give Cam some consistent playing time to try and work through some of his deficiencies as a player, to try and work through some of the defensive struggles, to try and work through some of the effort issues, to try and work through some of the, tunnel vision offensively. And when you look at other players, namely, ahead of him in the rotation, Jalen Green, who was afforded countless opportunities to work through his deficiencies as a player and become a significantly better, well-rounded prospect because of it, and then Cam wasn't really afforded those chances, it's disappointing to see. But the flip side of that, right, is that Cam very clearly didn't want to buy into whatever role the Rockets had envisioned for him. Because at the end of the day, especially when you look back at Ime's comments from his exit press conference, you have to imagine that the Rockets had a pretty good idea that they were going to be going after Kevin Durant at the end of the season, and that they knew that that was going to be their next play to try and get KD to dangle Jalen. Hell, you could if you really want to go tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, there's a reason Jalen Green's contract was structured the way that it was, and it just so happened that Jalen Green making $33 million and Dylan Brooks making $22 million was the exact amount of salary that you needed to get to Kevin Durant's salary. I'm just saying. So I think that when Ime talked at the press conference, he talked about bigger roles for both Reed and Cam this upcoming season. And I think that was truthful. I think that he kind of knew that the Rockets were going to try and make a swing for KD, and had that worked, right, and it did, that there would have been a role for Cam on the team this upcoming season. But it might not, it's not the role that Cam sees for himself, right? And that's the disconnect between what Cam wants for himself as a player and for his future career, and what Ime and the Rockets see Cam as being on this team, which is they needed a guy that would buy into his role. They needed a guy who, Cam has all the gifts, all the talent to be a really important part, or could have been a really important part of this team had he bought in, right? But that role might have only meant, 10, 15 minutes a night tops, coming off the bench, offensive spark, buy in defensively, play hard on that end, give 100% effort every night. And those were things that it feels like Cam was unwilling to do, I guess, in order to stay in Houston. And so the Rockets ultimately worked with Cam to get him to a location where he feels like he'll have a chance to thrive, and he will in Washington. He might not start for the Wizards, but he'll certainly get an opportunity to earn his role in Washington on a very bad team, on a team that has a bunch of other young talent. And, it's a great upside swing for the Wizards. So I have other thoughts, and look, normally I do a great tease and we get into the next segment. It's like, next segment, we're talking about this. I just have more thoughts on this that I want to get out. And it's just going to be kind of like word vomit as we navigate through this. So this is like the worst tease in all of teases, but stick around. We're going to keep talking about the Cam Whitmore stuff. We'll get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, we've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Look, Game Time is awesome for any events happening near you. It could be concerts, it could be going to see the Astros, it could be upcoming tickets for the Texans this next season, or again, Rockets tickets next season. There's so many different options there. Comedy and theater events, you name it, they've got it over on Game Time. My personal favorite thing about using the Game Time app, though, is it's fully transparent from start to finish. You know exactly how much you're going to pay for your tickets. They don't hit you with the hidden fees or price gouge you at the end. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right. Trying to navigate my way through these additional Cam Whitmore thoughts. So first and foremost, I want to make this point, and I have it in my notes, and I wanted to make this abundantly clear. The Cam Whitmore trade is not as a result of the direction the team is going this upcoming season, and it's not a result of the Kevin Durant trade. In fact, the KD trade gave Cam an opportunity to have a role, or to have a bigger role, a more clearly defined role with the team this upcoming season. Because had the Rockets not made the KD trade, if the Rockets still had Jalen Green and Dillon Brooks on the roster, where in the hell was Cam going to get his minutes in the first place? It would have been impossible. At least with the Rockets moving Jalen and Dillon and packaging two of their key rotation guys together to get KD, it opened up some additional room in the rotation for Cam to have a potential role. Even if it's a small role, 10, 12, 15 minutes a night, whatever, he could have had a role. And at least from, my understanding of the situation, the Rockets were optimistic about that being the case potentially moving forward. Is that, and you go back and look at the exit press conference with Ime Udoka talking about bigger roles for Reed Sheppard and Cam Whitmore. You have to imagine that Ime had it in his mind that, okay, if we can go get KD, then I'll have more minutes for Reed and Cam to give them a chance. But Cam clearly thinks that he's, deserving of a bigger role. And honestly, that's a fair thing to think. You have all this talent in the world. You've clearly got, at least next level scoring talent. And I think that from the Rockets perspective, you don't want to keep a disgruntled asset on the roster. I see a lot of Rockets fans who are like, oh my God, only 2 second-round picks. Well, they should have just kept him. Just keep him on the team. You don't want to keep a guy on the team that is unhappy in the situation, because that's how you get guys who are, locker room cancers, who start to, play disgruntled, or they bring down the vibes of the rest of the team, all that. And I will say that this deal is a continuation in a long line of deals that Rafael Stone has made as the Rockets general manager since taking over for Daryl Morey, in not even trying to, because I feel like the Rockets have truly rehabilitated their image from the Daryl Morey era, because back in the Morey era, Morey got a lot of flack for treating players like assets, right? Numbers on a spreadsheet, instead of treating them like living, breathing human beings that have complex thoughts, feelings, emotions, desires, dreams, hopes, ambitions, all that stuff, right? And the moment that Rafael Stone took over for Ime Udoka, sorry, not for Ime Udoka, oops. The moment that Rafael Stone took over for Daryl Morey, he made it a point to work closely with all those disgruntled veterans and guys who didn't want to be on a rebuilding team, and trying to get guys to their preferred destinations, or buying them out so they could go to a team that they wanted to go to. All those different moves, all those levers that he had to pull, dealing with situations like PJ Tucker, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Eric Gordon further down the line, just working through all these different vets and essentially getting guys to their preferred destinations. And so for the Rockets, who, again, reportedly had multiple offers on the table for Cam Whitmore, they likely could have just taken the best offer available, right? And it might have been a team like, I don't know, the Denver Nuggets, who like wanted to fork over like a really, heavily protected first round pick somewhere way down the line, or what, who knows, right? There were teams out there that were certainly interested in Cam. Maybe there was a team that was willing to offer 3 or 4 second round picks instead of just 2, or better quality second round picks. Ultimately, the Rockets worked with Cam and his representation to get him to a destination that he felt like would be best for his career moving forward, because Cam is going into year 3, and this will be his opportunity to really carve out a name for himself, and then he'll be extension eligible next summer. So if Cam balls out this upcoming year for the Wizards, then he'll be like, yo, give me my money. Like, clearly I'm worth it. I didn't have a chance in Houston, but now I have a chance, and you can see what I can do. So I think it's a smart play by the Rockets front office ultimately, because if Cam couldn't or wouldn't buy into the vision that they had for him here in Houston, you don't want to keep a disgruntled player on the roster. And it does pay dividends at the end of the day, because other players, other agents, other organizations, right? They take note of how executives, GMs treat their players. And so far, the Rockets have done like a complete 180 to where, with how Rafael Stone treats his players, and the fact that they have Ime Udoka, very much a player-friendly head coach, a guy that players want to play for. Houston's got a very desirable culture that has been built here in a very short amount of time, after being one of the worst teams in the NBA for 3 straight years during the Silas era. So I want to give the Rockets front office credit for that, even though on the surface it seems like, they, a miss or whatever. But also at the same time, I want to point out here to fans that are still frustrated by it. And look, again, I'm not going to hide I'm frustrated by it, right? Like, if I could have had my ideal outcome, it would have been keep Cam and try to work it out in some capacity, right? Keep him, see if you can get him to buy into the role. And if he just really doesn't want to, then flip him at the trade deadline or something. But clearly not the direction that they wanted to go. And they're trying to do right by Cam in this situation. I will say though that like the hit rate for like 20th picks in the NBA draft, it's not like the Rockets are just like burning assets left and right. Cause I know that I've seen some Rockets fans like point out like, oh my God, this is like yet another first round pick down the drain. Cause it's, Josh Christopher and Usman Garuba and Ty Washington and now Cam Whitmore. And it's like, okay, yeah, but where are those other 3 guys at right now? Like, where Josh Christopher, Ty Washington, and Usman Garuba aren't doing much of anything right now at the NBA level. So it's not the end of the world. It's like, okay, yeah, you can go back and look at the draft and be like, oh, well, you could have had this guy and you could have had this guy. The draft is a crapshoot in the first place. Like, yes, it sucks that you can go back and look at the Cam Whitmore draft and think about, I don't even have the draft pulled up in front of me, and I can't remember the different guys that they could have had off the top of my head. And I'm not going to bother pulling it up off rip. So just like, yes, you could go back and look at that draft and see the prospects taken after Cam Whitmore, be like, oh, the Rockets could have had him and he would have been a better part of the rotation. It's not how that works, right? Because at the end of the day, the Rockets just didn't have the space in the rotation to give Cam Whitmore the necessary developmental runway, or they could have had the space, ultimately didn't. I think that's a little bit of a failing on the coaching staff and Ime Udoka. Again, there's fault on both sides here. But I also I don't subscribe to the notion that it's like, the end of the world. Sometimes first round picks just don't hit, and that's okay. The Rockets, even after moving Cam to Washington, which again, I feel like still would have happened, or would have especially happened if they hadn't moved on from Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. They still have 5 of the 7 members of the young core. And those guys are all going to have plenty of opportunities to continue to grow and showcase themselves and develop moving forward. And that's one other major point that I wanted to address here about the Cam Whitmore situation and Rockets fans' concerns with Ime Udoka and his supposed lack of development for the young guys. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, I'm going to try and get all the final thoughts out about the Cam Whitmore trade and this whole situation, but I will, the big one that I want to focus on here is, and look, I want to preface this by saying, I am by no means like an Ime Udoka apologist, right? I've been critical of his offensive schemes or lack thereof at times. When he first came to Houston, I was like begging. I was like, bring an offensive coordinator with him, right? Like pair him with an offensive coordinator, because Ime Udoka sometimes very much feels like the defensive version of Mike D'Antoni, where Mike D'Antoni was an offensive, savant, genius, whatever, 7 seconds or less Suns, had a great way about, constructing and orchestrating NBA offenses, but defense wasn't his specialty. And so he brought in Jeff Bzdelik to be his defensive coordinator. And at times it certainly feels like Ime could use a more offensive minded guy as his like lead assistant to help orchestrate a better, more smoothly run Rockets offensive setup. But with that being said, I don't buy into this idea that like there are like Rockets fans who are like dooming and glooming on social media, crying about the fact that like, oh, here it comes. And, Ime's all about, he only wants to win and he's going to start trading all the young guys for veterans to be able to win at all costs. And first it was Jalen, now it's Cam. And again, I maintain that Cam likely still would have been dealt even if Jalen was still on the team. Like it felt like that was going to be the direction this thing went ultimately, because if Cam feels the way that he does and doesn't want to buy into the role that the Rockets have for him, which they had a role for him, then it is what it is. To me, Ime has done a great job helping grow and develop Alperen Sengun and Amin Thompson. Tari and Jabari are slightly more ancillary pieces, and so their development looks a little bit different than it did with Sengun or Will with Amin Thompson as he continues to grow. Ime did a phenomenal job helping Jalen Green grow and develop. Jalen, in the 2 years that he's been with Ime, has certainly grown to become a better player. Unfortunately, he didn't rise to the level that the Rockets really needed him to become to not ultimately be dealt for an established star in Kevin Durant. But Jalen absolutely grew and became a better player under Ime Udoka. So saying that Udoka doesn't know how to develop players is just absolutely outlandish. And in fact, like, obviously the whole thing in Boston happened, right? But Ime took two very young stars in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who were entering years 5 and 6, respectively, of their NBA careers. He took that team to the finals. That was a very young team with young stars leading that team, and he took them to the finals. And he would have continued to grow and build that team. And obviously, they eventually won a title with Joe Mazzulla taking over the helm. But like, the foundation of that team was kind of set by Brad Stevens, and then it was solidified by Ime Udoka in the 1 year that he was there and took them to the finals. And then Joe Mazzulla was able to elevate that team, and credit to Mazzulla, because I think he's a fantastic head coach, and he's done some fantastic offensive stuff over there that maybe Ime, TBD, we don't know. Is he capable of? Can he get more creative with his offensive schemes? Will things look differently on offense? Where things look different on offense now that Ime has like a true, 1A premier scorer to use in some of his offensive sets and actions and things like that. Who knows? We'll see. But I don't subscribe to that notion whatsoever. And I think that, hopefully we'll see, right, the fruits of that developmental labor very soon this next season with a guy like Reed Shepherd, who, Reed was the final draft pick of the Rockets rebuilding process. And he comes in with pretty decent expectations as the number 3 overall pick. And I see some Rockets fans who are like, why'd they get rid of Cam and they still have Reed Shepherd when Reed hasn't shown anywhere near, as high of flashes as Cam Whitmore? Well, it's because Cam's had 2 years and Cam plays a different role. There's different expectations. It's a different position, like all these different things. And at least as far as we know, from the questions and some of the behind the scenes stuff, whatever, is that like Reed, at least internally, checks all the boxes that the Rockets want out of him and the role that they have for him. Reed isn't sitting there banging a drum, wanting a bigger role. He wasn't disgruntled about losing the role that he did have as a rookie. And so the Rockets have a little bit more time to figure out what they have with Reed Shepherd before, abandoning ship or cutting bait and giving up on him or what have you. If Reed can't at least be the backup point guard this next year behind Fred VanVleet and Ime Thompson, then yeah, like there's going to be some major concerns and we might start having conversations about like, okay, is Reed going to actually pan out? But he gets the benefit of the doubt, at least for now. The other thing with the Cam stuff, right, is the Rockets are in a position where, financially being right up against the first apron this season, and then factoring in things like extensions for Kevin Durant and Tari Eason a little bit further down the line, Ime Thompson's likely rookie scale max extension, things of that nature. It's not the worst thing in the world to move on from Cam because, again, at the end of the day, if you had made it through the end of this next year, what does an extension look like for Cam Whitmore? Are you willing to extend a guy like that, a guy who literally wasn't even part of your rotation and you just want, like, here's the thing, is the 2 members of the core 7 of young prospects that the Rockets have gotten rid of, they traded Jalen Green for a top 10 player in the NBA, and they traded Cam Whitmore for a couple second-round picks, which, yeah, is a little bit of a disappointing return, but the Jalen position clearly upgraded with KD, and then Cam wasn't even a part of the rotation for this past season. He played some spot minutes here and there, and he had a couple games here and there where he popped off and things looked cool, and it was, Cam doing Cam things, but Cam himself as a player was not without his shortcomings. And so at this stage of where the Rockets are at, they just felt like it was time to move on, and Cam, didn't want the role that they had for him. And I feel like I've said that a bunch already on this show, so I feel like I'm hitting the wall where I'm repeating myself now. But the other thing that I will say, I think this is the final thought that I have on all this, is that I don't think this is a sign of, I guess, what is to come of the Rockets. And it's like, oh, all the young guys are going to get traded and, the Rockets are going to become this old veteran-laden team. No, the Rockets are doing a great job blending their youth with veteran talent. And I think that's the important takeaway from this is, the whole reason, the reason the KD trade makes a lot of sense and the reason it's such a fascinating move is because you get to contend for the next 2 or 3 years with KD. And I'm sure, and the Rockets may make another couple ancillary moves here or there. But as it currently kind of stands, right, this is like the best version of this team. And the only way this team realistically gets significantly better is through internal growth and development from the young guys, or maybe you can swing a deal by like packaging Dorian Finney-Smith and Clint Capella for somebody who's making like roughly $20 million a year as like a reserve, a reserve wing who's maybe got some more offensive punch than Dorian Finney-Smith or what have you. Like there's some creative stuff that the Rockets can do to bolster the roster a little bit later on without sacrificing more of the young guys. But I think it's clear with Sengun, their commitment to Sengun, the extension for Jabari, the hopeful, extension coming down the pipeline for Tari Eason. We know that they love Ime Thompson beyond everybody else, that he is the truly like one untouchable piece on the roster. And we know that they're high internally on Reed Shepherd. I don't think that the Rockets are going to suddenly turn around and start wheeling and dealing all these young pieces for older over the hill veterans to try and contend for titles in these next 1 or 2 years. They might still make a move here or there, but I think in large part, the reason that this thing is so beautiful in the way that it's likely to work out is even if the Rockets do disappoint and don't achieve a title in the next 2 or 3 years with Kevin Durant as their best player, they still have such an incredibly bright future with all these young pieces. and guys who want somebody hopefully will be able to take the mantle as best player on the team from Kevin Durant, hopefully before he hangs him up. Like, that would be the beauty of it, is like if Ime Thompson has this massive year 3 leap and looks like one of the best players in the NBA next year, then suddenly you've got a top 10 guy in KD and a pair of blossoming all-stars in Alperen, Sengun, and Ime Thompson, which is very much a possible outcome here. So it sucks that it didn't work out with Cam, but it's not the end of the world. Like, and I will say, actual final thought is this does open up a roster spot for the Rockets. So they have currently their 15th slot open. And they're only like a skosh under 2 million below the first apron, where they're hard capped at the first apron line. But if they elect to waive Nate Williams, who has a non-guaranteed deal, they could have about like $3.5 million of space between, where they're at financially and where the apron is, which would give them the flexibility to add one more piece, like a guy on a vet minimum deal, maybe. Like some people have suggested maybe Malcolm Brogdon as kind of a combo guard, veteran combo guard to have off the bench, maybe some Reed Shepherd insurance if he doesn't work out right away this next season, or if Fred VanVleet gets hurt, things like that. And that is an option that the Rockets have. But if I was a betting man, which you can be if you go to FanDuel.com, I would wager that the Rockets probably elect to leave that 15th slot open and wait until they get into the season, and maybe there's a name that shows up on the buyout market, or another guy. Maybe Damian Lillard wants to come to Houston. Just saying. But the Rockets have options there with that 15th slot. And that's part of the reason why they didn't trade Cam to get like another player back for him, and they just got the draft capital, because it gives them a little bit of financial flexibility and some maneuverability to be able to go sign another vet minimum guy, or at least receive a guy who's making $3.5 million or less by way of a trade, and be able to add one more piece that way. So unlikely, I think, that we see any more movement as far as roster changes between now and the start of the season at this point. Maybe they surprise, and maybe there's a name out there on the free agent market that they do want to get their hands on. Maybe Rafael Stone surprises everybody with another trade. I doubt it at this point. But again, the main takeaway for me is just like, it's disappointing that this is the end of the Cam Whitmore era in Houston. He had a tremendous amount of talent. He definitely had some deficiencies that he wasn't really given the opportunity to iron out like other players were within the rotation. And because of that, and because of the lack of a clearly defined role, or at least a role that matched his expectations, he was disgruntled. Rockets worked with him to find a suitable situation. He gets sent to Washington, and that's it. And now you move forward, right, with still an incredibly talented roster, and a roster that on paper should be battling for the best spot in the Western Conference, and could potentially be a team that's going to dethrone the OKC Thunder. So with that, those are my thoughts on my immediate kind of reaction to the Cam Whitmore situation. I want your thoughts, right? Is this a move that's going to come back to bite the Rockets in the ass? Are they going to regret trading Cam Whitmore to the Wizards? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.